Stephanie.
She was like a threat to me. Everything I did, she could match. That wasn't right.
Michael says he feels as if there are 3 people inside him, and one of them is evil.
I was in my own world. I let my body take over.
But through the final hour of questioning, he never does provide police with a single accurate detail of how he stabbed his sister to death.
I thought he was doing some nightmare. I didn't, I only know I did it now because she's dead.
Yet Michael is charged with murder and taken off to a juvenile prison. At home, his parents receive a very unexpected call.
12:30 at night, we got a call from the police station, and it was Detective Sweeney saying that they made an arrest in the case. They arrested the murderer of our daughter. And I said, who was it? Who is it? And they said, we've arrested your son.
We thought he'd done it. I mean, because at that point, because when a police officer tells you that someone did something, you think that they did it. I mean, we had trust in police up until this point.
The first thing I asked Michael when he got on the phone was, did you have anything to do with this? Did you murder Stephanie? And he said, I don't know, Dad. They keep telling me I did it, but I don't know.
When we return, police report they've found the murder weapon and Michael's accomplices. A week after the murder of 12-year-old Stephanie Crowe, family and friends grieve at her funeral. Her brother Michael, however, cannot attend. He is locked away in juvenile hall, charged 3 days earlier with stabbing her to death. It's a crime, police tell his parents, that Michael confessed to.
Why would Michael murder his sister? I mean, they had never fought. There was never any, what the police called intense sibling rivalry. The night before, Michael had helped her with her homework. They were lying on the floor, sharing a pillow, watching TV together. It just didn't make sense to me.
And now the case takes an even stranger turn. 3 days after Michael Crowe is charged with killing his sister, detectives visit the home of his best friend, Joshua Treadway. They find a knife under the 15-year-old's bed, one that he stole from another friend. The police think it's the type of knife that could have been used to kill Stephanie Crowe. Convinced that he is involved in the murder, police bring Josh in for questioning.
The evidence is going to screw you to the wall. So what do I do with Josh? I charge Josh with the murder of 12-year-old Stephanie Ann Crowe. That's the only option I have. Why? Josh had the murder weapon.
Over the next 12 hours, until 8 the next morning, police interrogate Josh the same way they did Michael, alone, without a lawyer. Josh's father is on hand and does get a chance to comfort his son, but for the most part, he allows detectives to interrogate Josh in his absence.
They lied to him about evidence. They made express and implied promises of leniency. They didn't feed him. They didn't let him use the men's room very frequently. They deprived him of sleep. They did everything that you're really not supposed to do.
Josh is shaken. He knows Michael has already been arrested, and the cops are also talking to his friend Aaron Hauser, the original owner of the knife.
We've talked in depth with Michael. We've talked in depth with Aaron. Who's to say they're not blaming you for this whole thing?
That's what I'm afraid of.
Okay, wait, stop.
Despite this ordeal, Josh admits nothing and is free to leave the station house. 2 anxious weeks later, he is called back in for a second session with police. By now, he's a nervous wreck, especially when he is led to believe his friends have set him up as the fall guy. Only then does Josh spill out his story. He was only the lookout in this violent crime, he tells police. It was his friends who killed 12-year-old Stephanie.
I knew that Michael was supposed to go in there and sort of take care of keeping Stephanie quiet. And Aaron was supposed to go in and take care of the business. It was going to happen, and I was going to dispose of the knife when it was done. Michael came back a little while after that, and he was rinsing the knife in the sink.
Within a day, 15-year-olds Josh Treadway and Aaron Hauser are also arrested and charged with Stephanie's stabbing death. They join Michael in juvenile hall. Just as quickly, when all 3 teenagers are finally lawyered up, as police would put it, there's no great surprise when they deny their confessions.
People are always like, oh, I didn't do it, 90% of the people in the state prison are claiming their innocence. And so, you know, you get a little bit jaded in this business after a while, and so I started looking at the videotapes with my jaded eye, and all of a sudden I realized that I actually had the real thing. I had a false confession case on my hands.
People would like to believe that they would never confess to a crime they didn't commit, short of being tortured. Most people would like to believe they wouldn't even confess under torture.
People confess to things that they don't do when their own will is overborne by their interrogator. They make them feel so hopeless that the only thing they can do to save themselves is to confess, even if they didn't do it. And I just got that horrible pit in your stomach feeling like, oh my God, these kids are innocent, they're looking at life. What am I going to do?
One thing Mary Ellen Attridge did do was bring in Richard Afshee, a Pulitzer Prize-winning expert in false confessions.
My reaction was that they ripped out Michael Crowe's heart on camera. It was the most horrible interrogation I've ever watched because of what they did to that child.
A Superior Court judge agrees. In December 1998, after Michael and his teenage co-defendants had been locked up for 8 months, he throws out Michael's confession on the grounds that it was illegally obtained, psychologically coerced. But the judge does allow part of Josh's confession, the part with the most incriminating details. So the case will proceed to trial, with all 3 boys being tried for murder as adults on the strength of Josh's statement.
I thought, okay, fine, you want to do it the hard way, I'll do it the hard way. If you want to let in the last confession, I'll bring all the other ones in and I'll show the jury where they came from. We will do this the long way.
1 month later, in January 1999, in the midst of jury selection for Josh's trial for murder, there's a dramatic break in the case. Hard work and a hunch pay off for lawyer Mary Ellen Attridge. A year earlier, on the same night Stephanie was murdered, neighbors of the Crowe family had complained to police about the intrusive behavior of a transient. Richard Raymond Tuitt, 28, was knocking on neighbors' doors looking for an old girlfriend. Tuitt was brought in for questioning. He had a history of mental illness and a conviction for car theft. He was briefly considered as a possible suspect. Police took his clothing and tested it, but they didn't find any blood evidence. Just as quickly, investigators dismissed Tuitt as too mentally unstable to have silently carried out a murder in a house filled with people. Police let him go free.
I'm still going with the detectives on this case, on their hunches, on what they did. However, where else do you get this Manson-like individual? When I looked at that, I took 2 or 3 steps back.
Police had held on to Richard Tuitt's clothing as evidence. Now, a year later, his red turtleneck catches the eye of the defense team.
Our mouths were hanging open because the fact was that when you looked at this shirt, you realized there was something on the shirt. You couldn't tell what it was. I couldn't look at the shirt and say, oh, that's a blood stain. But I did see a lot of staining on the shirt.
Attridge demands this time that Tuitt's clothing be sent for DNA testing. After all, if these stains include blood, Stephanie Crowe's blood, then Richard Tuitt might once again be a suspect. After weeks of waiting, the news is almost too good to be true.
This was such a strong DNA result that you could rule out anybody who ever walked on the planet Earth as a donor of this blood, except Stephanie Crowe.
And Stephanie's blood on Tuitt's shirt seems set in a splatter pattern, one consistent with a violent stabbing. For Attridge, the results also prove that her defendants are innocent and that their confessions are false.
I cried, I called my husband, I opened a bottle of champagne. I was like, that's it for me.
But that wasn't it. Not yet.
Welcome to the Rick Roberts Show.
On the same day the case is dismissed, Detective Chris McDonough calls into this radio show to defend his role in the interrogation process.
I did not wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and sit down and say, you know what, today's the day I'm going to plant and frame Joshua Treadway for murder.
Well, I don't think that anybody... Detective McDonough, I don't think anybody is saying that this is born of hostility rather than stupidity.
If I may finish, secondarily, on top of that, videotape it at the same time. It's ridiculous. I am in a job to bring justice to that family, but I'm also in a job to bring justice to Mr. Tuitt if, in fact, he is not the perpetrator.
Despite the fact that Stephanie Crowe's blood was found on Richard Tuitt's shirt, a year later, he still has not been indicted for her murder. The investigation has been reassigned to the San Diego County Sheriff's Office and is still ongoing. And the reason you have not heard directly from the police or district attorney in this story is because they have refused to comment on this case since the families of the teenage defendants filed a federal lawsuit against them. The suit seeks compensation for the harm done to their sons by illegal interrogations and the resulting false confessions. But it is important to remember that the overwhelming majority of confessions police obtain every day in this country are fairly sought and freely given. Voluntary statements made by guilty people confessing to crimes they did commit.
I hope false confessions are a very rare phenomena. I hope that we would be talking about something that is one small fraction of 1% of the number of people who are convicted in this country in any given year. And even if it's that small, it's still a lot of people.
I have had people confess who didn't do the crime. There was one case where we put a guy in for 9 months who didn't do the murder. He felt that he, by stating that he was there and didn't do it, was going to be treated less harshly than if he did it.
There are good cops, there are bad cops. There are also poorly trained cops. There are also cops who will step over the line to make a case knowing that they shouldn't do it, but do it anyway.
And it was just it was a bad case. And it happens.
In Michael Crowe's case, his entire interrogation was recorded on videotape, so a judge was able to see for himself how the teenager's confession of murder was illegally obtained. What if all police interrogations were videotaped?
I think there's only one reason why police resist recording. They want to preserve the right to break the law when they feel they need to do it. I don't see any other reason not to tape record.
No one believes detectives. No one believes police officers. I have been accused many times of beating confessions out of people. Take a look at the video. I have been accused of coercing people many times. Take a look at the video.
Yet only 2 states, Alaska and Minnesota, legally require the videotaping of all interrogations, taping that often pays off in unexpected ways.
We had one case where a man was accused of murder, and he claimed to be blind in the interrogation room. So the police were asking him questions the entire time he maintained he was blind. And then the police went out of the room to get some coffee, and he picked up the paper and started reading it. The jury can see that. And so it really gives us an opportunity to deflect any accusations about police coercion or about a violation of constitutional rights. And it's done there right on tape.
Stephanie Crowe's parents remain convinced that Richard Tuitt killed their daughter. In February 1998, just 3 weeks after Stephanie Crowe's murder, Tuitt was convicted on a misdemeanor charge of child annoyance for following and lewdly soliciting 2 girls about the same age as Stephanie. A month later, he was also convicted for breaking into a trailer home and sentenced to 3 years in prison. Since then, he has been released on parole 3 times, violated parole 3 times, and sent back to prison. The latest incident occurred in November 2000 when Tuitt removed the electronic monitor from his ankle and skipped out, undetected, from a halfway house in San Bernardino. Days later, he was apprehended 70 miles away, back in Escondido, just a mile from the Crowe family's new home. In December, Tuitt was sent back to prison, and Stephanie Crowe's parents were back on Rick Roberts' show to vent their anger about Richard Tuitt.
If I ever see him walking the streets, God forbid, I'll make sure justice is served.
For the average person, I mean, how do you get a prosecutor to prosecute the man who murdered your daughter? What is it going to take? I mean, her blood screams for justice, and no one's listening.